Good morning, everybody. I'm Zach Blanchard, and this is Political Brew. Joining me at this table this morning, Republican political strategist and former state senator Garrett Mason and former Democratic state senator Kathy Breen. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Good morning.
If you're wondering what the political climate is like in Maine's 2nd District this cycle, well, take a look. This video shared by the Penobscot County Sheriff's Office appears to show people tearing down a Harris Walls political sign using a truck and a chain. Now, Garrett, of course, this is likely just a one-off situation, but what does this say about our current political climate, if anything?
Kathy and I were talking before we got on air here, and it was like people have been stealing signs since the beginning of time, and since there was signs to steal. So, I mean, I don't know if I make too much of that. I will say that the way they were doing it was creative. But when I talk to candidates, that are running for office for their first time. Even when I first ran in 2010, it's a different world. Everybody's got a Ring camera. Everybody's got a security system. So, I mean, you got to act like you're being surveilled all the time, because you probably are. So I think it just draws more attention to things like this. But I mean, hooking up the chain to the sign nailed to a tree, I don't think you can get more 2nd District than that. So,
and Kathy, in the 2nd District, the reality is that there is a tight race between Austin Theriault and Jared Golden. And should Democrats be worried about how tight that race is, and given maybe that vibe that's in the district right now?
Of course. I mean, it is a tight race, and that district has gone back and forth for years. Jared Golden has a certain brand. I think in many ways he's done a good job representing the district. But yeah, he's got a tough race. And back to the sign issue, I mean, it's like there's no race that's complete without sign drama. So, bring it on. Here we go.
Well, and at the very least, it gets us ready for truck pool season at the fair.
Exactly.
So
we'll get at that. Right. All right. Speaking of the CD2 congressional race, both candidates seem to be politicizing the Lewiston shootings. This week, Austin Theriault promised to race at the Oxford Plains Speedway to try to raise $50,000 for victims of the tragedy. That prompted Golden to announce he would direct his campaign to donate that $50,000 of its own money to shooting victims, and called on Theriault and others to do the same. Kathy, a worthy cause, but does it feel right?
It feels like a sideshow to me. I think the tragedy in Lewiston is by definition political, because it has to do with, the laws and in our state and in our country, and the fact that we are awash with firearms. So I think it's what I'd rather see these two gentlemen look at is not so much who can raise the most money, but who can actually implement policies and work to reduce gun violence in the 2nd CD in Maine. Obviously, guns are used most in Maine for suicide deaths, unfortunately, and I'm much more interested in seeing what kind of policies they would like to enact than who can raise the most money.
Yeah, and Garrett, before we get to you, speaking of that policy, you might remember after the tragedy, Golden made this announcement.
The time has now come for me to take responsibility for this failure, which is why I now call on the United States Congress to ban assault rifles like the one used by the sick perpetrator of this mass killing.
So on substance, Garrett, is there pressure on Golden to stand by this and take a stronger stance on gun safety legislation?
Yeah, I outlined that, but I do want to just kind of add to something that Kathy said. If you wanted to pick a way to raise money for these victims, because let's be honest, they are in for a long road. I mean, a lot of these folks were killed in the prime of their life, and they had a lot of working years, and that's a real problem for a lot of these families. Is they have to make up for that income, and raising money for those people is great. I think LePage did it in a really wonderful way. He's not in office anymore. He raised $500,000 for those victims, and I think that's admirable. So I mean, I'd love to stick to things like that. But in regards to what you just said, yeah, I think he's under tremendous pressure. No matter how you feel about how about that policy, I have a very different opinion about that. But I mean, that was a very public. I don't know if I've ever seen a public change of stance like that. So yeah, I'm sure he's under tremendous pressure to follow through on his promises.
All right. Meantime, race for the White House this week. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. formally withdrew from the ballot in Maine. It comes after he suspended his campaign last week and endorsed former President Donald Trump. Kathy, we've talked a lot about this on Brew. There were legitimate concerns that he might take away votes from Trump. Is that a concern?
I'm not sure what Robert F. Kennedy was doing all these months, but if I think he's now thrown his support to Trump, and if there are Trump voters or Kennedy voters who pick Trump, so be it. I just think he never really had an operation in Maine. He wasn't really a presence here. So, to the extent that he had followers, they were very, very small number of voters. So we'll see.
Do you think it changes the calculus, Garrett?
I think it might be a small amount of voters, but I think in this election where things have tightened up like 7 points in the past couple of weeks, I mean, that is, every vote counts. And RFK was actually here in Freeport a couple of months ago. It was actually one of his last campaign stops, was in Freeport at a farm. And so, yeah, I mean, I think my first reaction to, RFK dropping off the ballot was why? I mean, we have ranked choice voting for presidential elections here in Maine, and this would have been the perfect opportunity for the RCV folks to come out and say, hey, you can still vote for Kennedy, but then if you want to vote for Trump or you want to vote for Harris, do that. So, I mean, I think it draws more attention to, it's a confusing process, and RFK, only dropped out of 10 states. So I'm sure that was part of the calculus. And it was, I think it draws attention to that, at least it did for me.
Yeah, we'll see how it plays out. Meantime, Trump's running mate J.D. Vance was in New England this week, and he got a bit of a mixed reaction from union firefighters in Boston.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. Well,
that response as Vance took the stage at the Association of Firefighters convention. Despite some of those boos, he also was cheered when he told the crowd he and Trump would shut down the border. Vance also pledged to end COVID-19 vaccine mandates for firefighters, as well as provide more funding for departments. Garrett, are you surprised by the reaction here?
No, I think, this is J.D. Vance doing what J.D. Vance does, is he's not afraid to go into the lion's den. I mean, it's no secret that, union members have not been fervent Republican supporters, at least at the, the top brass tacks level. But I think it shows the difference between J.D. Vance and Donald Trump, and you contrast that with the Vice President and Governor Walz. I mean, they'll go anywhere. And right now, I think the ticker is at one interview from Kamala Harris done by CNN. And, Donald Trump and J.D. Vance will go anywhere and talk to anybody, and you don't see that from the other side.
Kathy?
Well, I would say that Kamala Harris is not spending a lot of time on network and cable news. She's actually out.
Sure.
She's actually out meeting with people in the swing state. She's barnstorming. She's going to Pennsylvania. She's going to Michigan. She's out there meeting voters. So I think that's terrific. I'd much rather see her do that than be on cable news or network news. But in terms of J.D. Vance and unions, what a big surprise, in Boston in particular with the firefighters. I mean, that is like such a brotherhood. And, I'm not at all surprised that they are not big fans of J.D. Vance. And I mean, whether or not they care about, these are people on the front lines of public safety. The vaccine issue, I'm sure they're all vaccinated and they want to walk into houses where people are vaccinated. So I'm not sure what J.D. Vance was trying to gain, but we'll see.
But Garrett, there has been this sort of rocky start with Vance.
Mm-hmm. I mean, listen, when I look at J.D. Vance, I look at someone who's fearless. He will go into a place like that and take it. He's going to articulate his values. I mean, I would love to see Kamala Harris go to a Right to Life rally and go and talk to those people. They don't agree with her. There's a lot of people in that room that probably don't agree with J.D. Vance. But the bottom line is J.D. Vance will go. Kamala Harris and Tim Walz won't. And, that's, I think we do. I think it very much plays out. I would be willing to bet, because I know this for a fact, that we'll use Life, for example, all those organizations send out blanket invitations to the president, to the vice president,
So you think
to all
Donald
these people.
Trump is going to go to a Planned Parenthood rally?
I think he absolutely would. I think he 100% would, and I think deep down, everybody at this table knows that he would.
But why?
All right, we're going to leave it there. Garrett Mason, Kathy Breen, thanks so much. The Weekend Morning Report is back right after this. Good morning, everybody. I'm Zach Blanchard, and this is Political Brew. Joining me at the table this morning, Republican political strategist and former state senator Garrett Mason and former Democratic state senator Kathy Breen. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Thanks for being with us. First, the countdown to Election Day continues, and this week Democrats in Maine announced efforts to lock in the black vote. House Speaker Rachel Talbot Ross and other local leaders were joined by Ohio Democratic Congressman Joyce Beatty to launch the Black Mainers for Harrison Walls outreach program in Portland's Monument Square.
Say to any Mainer from any geography or racial background that this election is important for you to do something.
Now, Kathy, is this a sign the Harris campaign is starting a strong ground game in Maine?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the Harris Maine team, I mean, it's folks who have a lot of experience on the ground in Maine, and I think they're gonna tackle every district and every neighborhood and every voting area and have a very, very strong voter turnout program. So, yeah, it doesn't surprise me at all.
Garrett?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, Maine is a bit of an enigma when it comes to, you know, getting out the vote in like presidential politics. I think both campaigns feel comfortable where they are. I think, you know, the Harris campaign feels pretty solid in the 1st district and the Trump campaign feels pretty solid in the 2nd district. You know, as far as like this specific event goes, you know, obviously with Rachel Talbot Ross, I mean, she was the first, I believe the first African-American House Speaker, female African-American House Speaker. And so, I mean, she's an obvious choice to lead that effort. And, you know, I think 2% of the population in Maine is African-American. But in an election like this, and I think Maine was decided by around 50,000 votes last year. I mean, every vote counts, like we were talking about in the first segment. So probably a wise move to mobilize those voters. But I do think the campaigns are relatively comfortable where they're at in Maine.
Because the question is that ground game going to translate in the 2nd district from Portland's Monument Square?
Yeah.
That's the question, right, Kathy?
Yes, I mean, I think that the vast majority of people of color in Maine live in CD1, but I think it's really important that we, you know, mobilize every vote in every part of the state. So to me, it's a mobilization and a voter turnout thing.
And as for Maine Republicans, former Governor Paul LePage is working his way back into the spotlight, and he's targeting Senator Angus King. LePage is backing former Maine GOP Chair Demi Kuzunis, who's hoping to unseat King come November. In a campaign email, LePage claimed King was, quote, out of touch. Now, Garrett, we should say LePage is a resident of Florida again, but does he still carry some weight here?
I mean, I think most governors take up residence in Florida after their term in office is over. So I'm not sure that's a surprise. But I mean, Paul LePage holds a ton of sway amongst Maine Republicans. I mean, he is the preeminent figure in Republican politics in Maine. I think that's fair to say. So, you know, to help Demi Kuzunis, someone who he placed in the chairmanship at the Maine GOP is no surprise. I think one surprise, I will say, is the UNH poll that came out that kind of surveyed Maine politics in the races. I was surprised to see Angus King only up 10 points. I think he's usually up much more than that. And so I think Demi Kuzunis has showed that she has cut into the lead a little bit. I did find that very interesting, and she does have a little bit of momentum. We'll see how that trade plays out in the general election, but it's no surprise to see Paul LePage helping out a former friend.
But Kathy, this is still a long shot, right?
Sure. I mean, Angus, again, former governor, very well respected, independent. You know, he
Didn't move to Florida.
Didn't move. I think he's the only one. Yeah.
He did an RV trip, but he came back. Yeah. But you know, Angus, I think, plays a really vital role in the U.S. Senate. He is still one of those characters who can accomplish a lot across the aisle. And I think most Mainers, you know, really appreciate that role that he plays. And as far as LePage, I mean, you know, I think, of course, he's going to come to bat for his party and his allies. But I guess I wonder, like, who is the heir to Paul LePage? You know, who's going to be the next sort of flag bearer for the Republicans in Maine? You know, I'm just curious to see how that plays out in the next few years.
Me too.
And no ideas, Garrett?
I mean,
Put you on the spot.
I think there's a lot of people who have like done like various flag waving in the Republican Party, but I mean, I think that really shakes out when it's time for a gubernatorial. I mean, after the election's over, I guarantee we are going to start seeing some people come out of the woodwork. Sure. I think there's a lot of people who want to take that mantle on, but I think one of the things that happened in 2022 was Paul LePage reclaimed the mantle for himself, and so the opportunity to build that bench was kind of lost in that cycle. So it's going to be incumbent on Republicans to do that again.
As for the Trump campaign, it's finding itself in hot water. This week, there was a new indictment in his election interference case for his role in the January 6th Capitol riots, and he's facing some scrutiny from the Army now for an incident at Arlington National Cemetery.
What a horrible day it was.
The Army accusing Trump aides of pushing a cemetery employee aside and attempting to remind them of rules that prohibit political activities at Arlington. The former president posed for a photo op with the family of a fallen service member as he placed flowers on their grave. Kathy, your thoughts on this?
Well, it's classic Donald Trump. Rules don't apply to him. If there's something he wants to do, he, does it and asks for forgiveness later. I think in this situation, it was particularly offensive to folks in the military, folks who have lost family members in the line of duty and in service to our nation. And there's a reason that those rules are in place at Arlington National Cemetery. That is sacrosanct, holy ground. And there's no political candidate for any reason that should be able to use that backdrop to further their political agenda, to further their campaign. I think it's really, really unfortunate.
Garrett.
And Joe Biden shouldn't have put it in his 2020 commercials as he did. This attitude of, nobody has ever filmed at Arlington, it's just not true. I mean, every presidential campaign as far back, what I could research is Obama has put footage of Arlington in their political campaign commercials. But as far as Donald Trump, as far as Donald Trump goes, let's talk about why he was there. He was there because he was invited by the Gold Star families that were laying those wreaths, and he was asked. He was asked by the families to have photographers there to film the moment, and that happens all the time. But
I think the question becomes, what about the families of the other fallen service members whose graves were next to them?
But that's fine. But the bottom line is that to pretend that this is something that no political campaign has ever done, it's just not true. It's just not true. There's photographic and campaign evidence of them doing this.
There's a very big difference between putting footage of an image of a cemetery versus actual people standing there doing things on grave sites. That's very different.
I agree with your original statement when you said that the backdrop shouldn't be used in politics by any candidate.
All right, we'll leave it there. Finally, let's wrap things up with quick winners, losers. Garrett, you're first.
Well, I'm going to start with my loser of the week, which was me, because in last week's in last week's Political Brew episode, I had to look at a lot of different cameras and it didn't go well.
Oh my goodness!
I'll take that last week, and I'll also name myself the winner this week because I didn't have to do that.
Wow.
So
all right, keeping it simple. Yeah. Follow that up, Kathy.
All right. Well, I think the loser, I feel badly for the military families at Arlington, so I'll say that they're the losers. And the winners, I will say that anybody who has plans outdoors this weekend, this is the sweet spot of Maine weather. It's just fabulous. So I think everybody wins in Maine this weekend.
Happy fall, y'all.
And happy Labor Day.
Happy fall, y'all. Get that pumpkin spice. All right, Kathy Breen, Garrett Mason, thank you. That's going to do it for this week's Political Brew. Remember, you can watch anytime on YouTube or New CENTER Maine Plus. The Morning Report is back right after this.